Hi, my name is Lila Labine, and you are watching my free video lesson, 5 Common Mistakes I See in Fiction Writing. Fixing these common mistakes will make your novel look more professional, which will help your readers trust you as the author. And that makes it easier for them to get lost in your story, to enjoy your story, and then to want to read more of your books. The first thing that I see often is overdoing the emphasis. What I mean by that is using a lot of all caps or multiple question marks or multiple exclamation marks, um, overusing italics. All of this is it's just overdoing it, and it's usually not necessary. In most genres, you're not going to want to use multiple exclamation marks or question marks in one sentence. It's going to be very rare that you're going to use a sentence of all caps for emphasis. Um, it does happen. You'll see it in traditionally published books, but you'll see that it's used very rarely. There are certain genres, such as kids' books, picture books, middle grade novels, and like Japanese light novels, comics, of course, where you will see these things. But in the general contemporary fiction or historical fiction or sci-fi and fantasy, you're not often going to be seeing overdoing any emphasis. So here are 3 examples. You know, it's fine once in a while to have an all caps, but then to on top of that have the 3 question marks and the 3 exclamation marks. No, you don't want to do that. I would definitely, if I were editing this manuscript, I would definitely advise to get rid of some or all of it. If she really wanted to go with me, she would have. I know it. So sometimes definitely italics help. And you may want to keep one of those, but I would choose one. I would choose the one that you find most important for understanding the sentence and the context. And then I would get rid of the other 2, at least, if not all 3. And then you have that last one, it's in italics, and you have the 5 exclamation marks. It looks in most genres, it looks unprofessional. Of course, you get to do what you want. You're the author, and sometimes you want to try new things. But I will tell you that most of the time, these things don't make your book look good. Like I said, depending on the genre. And I hate to give like overall rules because I really support authors doing what they want to do for their art. But there are things, if you're still gathering a following, if you want to sell a lot of books, anything like that, just, watch out. Just maybe cut it down a little bit if you can. So using italics can sometimes help to prevent misreading a sentence that could be read in multiple ways. You can't do that to me. So that could be read, you can't do that to me, or you can't do that to me, or you can't do that to me. If it's not obvious from the surrounding sentences how the sentence should be read, then sure, italicize the word that you want to be emphasized. That is when italics is useful. The second thing I see that a lot of fiction writers do is they're not cutting out the repetition. So you want to make sure that even before you send to your editor, that you're doing a round of self-editing where you're focusing on cutting out repetition and redundancy. Repetition of pet words and phrases. We all have them. We all have words and phrases that we use a lot in our writing. So you'll just do a search for those in your manuscript. Usually we're aware of our own pet words and phrases, and cut those out or change them when you can. Of action beats, there's often a lot of a certain action beat in your manuscript. So some authors really like to talk about their characters smiling. Some really shrug a lot. The arched eyebrow is another one. There's a lot, and it's hard to come up with fresh action beats all the time, but you want to make sure you're not repeating them over and over. Repetition of character and setting descriptions. So if you're describing your character a certain way, just do it once or twice. You don't want to keep talking about his icy blue eyes and using that exact phrase every time. It'll get old. And then we all also have our favored punctuation. As writers, there's I'm not a fiction writer, but when I'm writing, I know that I enjoy using the em dash. That's a weakness of mine. So when I'm revising my blog posts or any sort of content I put out, I make sure to check that I didn't overdo it on the em dashes. So maybe yours, I often see ellipses overdone. Make sure that you don't have it in every line of dialogue, because that's too much. And then repetition of sentence structure. So if all your sentences are the exact same length, if they all start with a like entering the shower, and then getting out of the shower, he grabbed his towel, when you start them all the same way, or end all your sentences the same way, or use a lot of the same words, it just gets very old and boring. So you want to vary your sentence structure. And then repetition of a word or part of a word within a sentence. So even if you're talking about, if you say snowman and then snow in the same sentence, sometimes that can be too much. If you read it out loud, you'll often hear that. It's like you just hear the snow twice and it feels a little off or grating to the ears. You'll catch that more when you read out loud, which is one of my things I always recommend to, when you're self-editing, read your manuscript out loud. And that's when you'll catch where a word or a part of a word has been repeated multiple times in a sentence or a paragraph, and you want to revise that. I also see a lot of incorrectly punctuated dialogue, which I get. It's like so complicated. I sometimes have to look up a rule because it's just, there are so many little tricky instances where I don't even remember, So, but you want to do the best you can to get your dialogue punctuation in good shape before you send it to your editor. Otherwise, your editor is going to be spending a lot of time on that and a lot less time helping you reword awkward sentences, or helping you make sure your dialogue sounds natural, or doing some fact checking for you. So just do the best you can. So here are some correctly punctuated sentences. When you have your dialogue tag at the beginning of a sentence, as in the first one, I asked, you're going to make sure you have that comma before your dialogue starts. So I asked, why can't you just understand? And your ending punctuation goes inside the quotation marks. In the second sentence, you have the dialogue tag in the middle of the dialogue. So, yes, he does want to go is one sentence of dialogue, and you're interrupting it with that dialogue tag. So what you're going to do is have that comma right after yes within the quotation marks. And then right after the dialogue tag, you have another comma, and then you finish the sentence of dialogue. In the third example, the person who's speaking is quoting someone else. So, why do you think you have to be there? He asked. You're not special. So the have to be there is in single quotes because it's already inside of a double quoted piece of dialogue. This is for American English, and for British English, it's actually the opposite. Um, but I mostly go over American English. So if you have quoted dialogue, quoted material inside of dialogue, you're going to use single quotes. And your punctuation is usually going to go on the outside of the single quotes, because the question is the whole sentence, not just that quoted piece of dialogue. I hope that makes sense. I am going to have a course available, a mini course available in October on dialogue and action beats, and punctuating dialogue will definitely be a part of that mini course. So watch out for that if this is confusing you. And here are some more correctly punctuated sentences. You use the em dash in that first one, that line, when your dialogue is interrupted. Use ellipses if you're trailing off or there's hesitation. When you use the ellipsis, if the next sentence is it, or if the next, so I don't know, what do you think? Those are two separate sentences. He's trailing off the I don't know, and then he's starting a new sentence. So the W in what is capitalized. In the fourth sentence, it's more like a pause or hesitation. It's all one sentence, so you're not capitalizing that D in doing. How is she doing that? Another thing I see fiction writers do is not paying attention, not catching inconsistencies and contradictions. You need to keep track of the names and the descriptions of your characters. You want to make sure throughout the whole book she has long brown hair. Unless she gets a haircut in the book, but you don't want things to suddenly change. And sometimes that can be hard to keep track of, because sometimes you change your mind in the middle of a manuscript and then you forget to write that down and make sure you go back and change the beginning of the manuscript. So make sure you keep track of names and descriptions of characters, names and descriptions of settings, story or world specific vocabulary. I'm mostly talking about sci-fi and fantasy. Because you get to choose the spelling of the words you make up, and you want to make sure you're spelling it the same way every time. Capitalization choices, spelling choices. Sometimes words can be spelled multiple ways depending on the dictionary or depending on what type of English you're writing in. And then punctuation choices. There are certain things that aren't always right or wrong, like putting a comma before to at TOO at the end of a sentence, stuff like that. So you want to maybe write down what you usually do and make sure that it's always consistent. And the last thing is not fact checking. When you don't fact check, your readers lose faith in you as the author. You want them to trust you as a professional writer. So I know it's fiction, but if you're using real places in your manuscript, make sure you're spelling them correctly. If you're using any real life science, make sure it's accurate. It's a fact. If you're writing a historical fiction, if you're writing historical fiction, make sure that the language and the clothing of your characters is accurate for that time and that location. Real books, songs, movie, and TV show titles should be accurate. Inventions, make sure you don't want to write about cars in the 1500s because they weren't invented yet. So little things like that. That's a more obvious one. I'm using the obvious example so that I'm sure to not be wrong. But sometimes it's tricky. And then brands, make sure you're spelling those or capitalizing them exactly as they should be capitalized. And vehicle models, just, all of this stuff, plants and animals, make sure they are native to the setting of your story, if they're in your story, unless you're at a zoo or, somehow they were introduced to the area. And then major world events, if your story is set in the US in the 1930s, you want to make sure that your characters are discussing or being affected by the Great Depression. And even if it's fiction, it feels almost like the author just didn't take the time, didn't care enough about their story to make sure it fit in the timeline, in the setting of that actual time. So how are you gonna prevent these mistakes? Take a break from writing and revising. Take a break every now and then. When you come to your manuscript with fresh eyes, it's easier to spot things that you didn't notice before when you've been staring for hours and hours and hours at your manuscript. Then go through your manuscript slowly and scrutinize every little detail. I know that is boring, horrible. I don't know. But that's what editors are for too. So do it yourself. And if you have the means, please hire a professional editor. They are going to help you so much, and they will see the manuscript, like I always say, with fresh eyes. And yeah, they have methods. We know what we're doing. So that's why editing is so expensive, because it is very tedious. It takes a lot of time. Yes, I can read your book in 5 hours, but I cannot professionally edit it in 5 hours. It's going to be, a lot more, like 4 times that much. So, and then use beta readers, because beta readers will point out any inconsistencies or contradictions that they find. They're not professional editors or fact checkers, but they will see things and they'll let you know. So writing without revising is the literary equivalent of waltzing gaily out of the house in your underwear. I love that quote. I think it's funny and so true. So make sure you check your work. Check your writing. I sound like a teacher. I have blog posts that might help. I have one on overdoing emphasis. It's actually about all the little details in your manuscript, but it includes information about emphasis and, I believe, punctuation. I also have a separate blog post about dialogue and cutting repetition from your manuscript. The Magic of Fiction by Beth Hill is a great resource, as is Dreyer's English by Benjamin Dreyer. And it sounds boring, but he actually has a pretty good sense of humor. So it's not such a bad read. And then in October of 2023, I'm going to have multiple mini courses available. And here we go. They are going to be on point of view, internal monologue, action beats and dialogue, consistency and authenticity, and cutting repetition and fixing redundancy. So those will definitely help you with some of these common mistakes that I see. And they'll be starting at $24, and there will be other price tiers depending on whether you want some one-on-one help from me. Thank you very much for joining me, and I hope that this was helpful to you, and I wish you the best luck on your writing.